The people who change your life rarely look important when you first meet them. At 11:47 p.m., the neon open sign in the front window of Rosie's diner buzzed like it was tired too, flickering over the wet parking lot where rain kept turning the asphalt silver. Inside, the coffee had been sitting on the burner too long. The fries' oil smelled heavy in the air, and Claire Bennett was wiping down table 7 with the kind of speed that only came from doing the same thing 6 nights a week for $10 and change an hour plus tips that never came when the weather turned ugly. Her feet ached inside her non-slip shoes. Her apron pocket held exactly $14 in crumpled bills, and the last thing she needed was trouble this close to closing. Then the bell above the door gave a thin little jingle, and every head in the diner turned at once. The man who stepped in looked like the storm had personally picked him out. His dark jacket was soaked through, his hair dripped onto the worn black and white tile, and his boots looked old enough to have forgotten what dry felt like. He paused just inside the doorway, not speaking, just taking in the room with a kind of quiet that made people uncomfortable. One guy at the counter snorted into his pie. A woman in a cream coat pinched her purse closer. From behind the register, Claire heard her manager mutter, "Oh no, not tonight." The man started toward an empty booth near the window, but before he could sit, Mitch was already moving, all forced smile and sharp elbows. "Kitchen's closing," he said, though the grill was still hot, and Claire knew it. "Try the shelter on Maple." The man nodded once, like he had heard worse from better people, and turned back toward the door. Something in that small motion hit Claire harder than it should have. Maybe it was the way he kept one hand in his pocket like he already knew he did not have enough. Maybe it was because dignity looked lonelier than hunger. "Wait," she called, louder than she meant to. Mitch shot her a warning look, but she was already reaching for a menu. "We still have coffee. And a seat." The man looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes steady and unreadable. Up close, they did not match the rest of him. They were too calm, too clear, like they belonged to someone who was used to being listened to. Claire ignored the strange flicker in her chest and guided him to the booth by the glass. She set down a mug, poured fresh coffee instead of the burnt stuff, and slid him the last hot plate from the pass, the one she had been planning to take home after her shift. Mitch hissed her name from across the room. Claire did not turn around. She only placed a paper employee meal ticket beside the plate and said softly, "A bad day should not end with an empty stomach." The man stared at the plate like he had not expected kindness to arrive on chipped white ceramic, and for a second Claire thought he might refuse it out of pride. Instead, he looked up at her and said, very quietly, "Thank you." His voice was low and even, not shaky, not desperate, which only made him harder to place. Most people who came in cold and hungry wore their need right on the surface. This man carried his like a secret. Claire gave him the smallest smile she had left and reached for the coffee pot again. "You can take your time," she said. "We are here a little longer." Across the room, Mitch slapped a stack of receipts onto the counter hard enough to make the sugar caddy jump. Claire knew that sound. It meant trouble saved for later. She kept moving anyway, topping off ketchup bottles, gathering silverware, pretending her pulse was not climbing. The diner had thinned to 3 late customers and the dishwasher in the back, but the room still felt crowded with judgment. One woman whispered something to her date and glanced toward the booth by the window. Claire did not need to hear the words. She had heard versions her whole life. People always found polished ways to say the same ugly thing. Some lives matter more than others. She hated that sentence even when nobody said it out loud. By the time the clock over the pie case crept past midnight, the man had eaten every bite. Not quickly, not greedily, but carefully, like he respected the meal more because it had cost someone something. Claire dropped the check folder on his table out of habit, then immediately slid it back. "Do not worry about that," she said. "It is covered." His gaze fell to the employee meal ticket beside the empty plate, then back to her face. "That was yours," he said. Claire shrugged, but her cheeks warmed because he had noticed. "I can make toast at home." For the first time, something almost like a smile touched his mouth. It changed him more than it should have. It made him look less worn, less lost, and strangely younger. "You should not have to," he said. Before Claire could answer, Mitch stormed over and planted one hand on the table edge. "You can head out now," he told the man, then turned to Claire with that tight, mean smile managers used when they wanted witnesses. "And you, office. Now." Claire felt every eye in the diner lift toward her. She straightened anyway. I will be there in a minute. Mitch leaned closer. No, you will be there now. The man in the booth rose slowly to his feet, tall enough that Mitch had to take half a step back without meaning to. For one suspended beat, the air changed. Claire could not explain it. The stranger did not raise his voice. He did not do anything dramatic. He only placed the paper meal ticket into the inside pocket of his wet jacket as if it were worth keeping, looked at Claire with those unreadable eyes, and said, "Some people do not forget who fed them on the worst night of their life." Claire did not breathe again until the door shut behind him and the bell above it gave one last tired chime. Then the diner felt suddenly smaller, as if the storm had followed him out and left all its pressure behind. Mitch pointed toward the narrow office near the back hall. "Now," he said, and this time Claire did not answer. She only untied her apron with fingers that had started to shake and followed him past the pie cooler, past the humming soda machine, past the swinging door that led to the cramped little room where every bad conversation in her life seemed to happen. The office smelled like burnt coffee and printer ink. A schedule was pinned crooked on the corkboard. A broken desk fan clicked every few seconds without moving any air. Mitch closed the door and folded his arms. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Claire set her apron on the filing cabinet and lifted her chin. "I gave a hungry man dinner. You gave away store food. You ignored direct instruction. You embarrassed me in front of customers." Claire almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in her chest. He was cold and hungry. Mitch let out a sharp breath through his nose. "You do not get paid to play savior. You get paid to follow policy." The words hit harder because she had heard versions of them before too, from landlords, from bill collectors, from anyone who thought compassion was a luxury item. Claire looked down at her hands, still faintly smelling like dish soap and coffee, and thought of the empty refrigerator in her apartment, the overdue electric bill tucked under a magnet, the stack of community college brochures she had stopped opening because hope had started to feel expensive. "So what now?" she asked. Mitch slid a form across the desk without meeting her eyes. "You are off the schedule until further notice. Consider this a suspension." For a second, the room tilted. Not enough to make her fall, just enough to remind her how thin the floor under her life really was. "You are suspending me for one meal?" Mitch gave a shrug that was somehow colder than anger. "I am suspending you for poor judgment." Claire stared at the paper, at the blank line waiting for her signature like it had been expecting her all along. Then she picked up the pen and signed. Not because she agreed, not because she was not hurt, but because some humiliations become easier when you stop begging them to be fair. 10 minutes later, she stepped out into the parking lot with her purse tucked under one arm and her cardigan pulled tight against the ring. The neon sign behind her finally went dark, leaving the windows black and empty. Her car had died 2 months ago, so she started the 1.8-mile walk home beneath a sky the color of wet concrete. Water soaked through the canvas of her sneakers within the first block. By the second, she was shivering. By the third, she was angry enough to keep warm on that alone. Yet somewhere between the laundromat and the closed hardware store, another thought slipped in, quiet and stubborn. When that man had looked at her, he had not looked embarrassed for himself. He had looked sad for her. And for reasons Claire could not explain, that unsettled her far more than losing the job. Claire slept in fragments, the kind that never felt like sleep at all. Rain tapped against the window unit in her apartment until nearly dawn, and every time she drifted off, she saw the same thing again. A soaked stranger rising from a diner booth, slipping her paper meal ticket into his pocket like it mattered. By 8:30 that morning, she was standing in her kitchen in socks that did not match, staring at the last 2 eggs in her refrigerator and trying to decide whether to save them for dinner. Her phone buzzed against the counter. For one hopeful second, she thought it might be an apology from Mitch. Instead, it was a text from Tina, the morning hostess at Rosie's. "Emergency staff meeting. 11 sharp. Mandatory." Claire frowned at the screen. She was suspended. Mandatory should not have included her. A second message came before she could reply. "Where's something decent? Corporate is here." That sent a thin line of unease through her. Rosie's never got surprise visits from corporate, not in person. Corporate lived in emails, policy memos, and posters about hospitality curling at the corners near the break room sink. Claire looked around her apartment, at the tiny table by the window, the thrift store lamp, the stack of unopened bills tucked beneath a grocery coupon, and let out a slow breath. She chose the one blouse she owned that still held a clean crease, a pale blue one she usually saved for job interviews, and paired it with dark jeans and the flats that pinched her heels after half a mile. By 10:50, she was back in the parking lot outside Rosie's. Only now the place looked strangely polished, as if someone had tried to wash years of grease and hurry off the building in a single morning. Two black SUVs sat near the curb, their paint gleaming under a sky that had finally cleared. Claire stopped walking. Men in pressed suits moved in and out of the entrance carrying tablets and leather folders. The front windows reflected sunlight instead of neon, and for the first time the diner looked less like a lifeline and more like a stage. Inside, every employee had been gathered near the counter. Tina gave Claire a wide-eyed look that said she had no idea what was happening either. Mitch stood near the register in a tie Claire had never seen before, sweating through his confidence. "There she is," he said when he noticed Claire, but there was no smugness left in his voice now. Only nerves. Before Claire could ask a single question, the back office door opened and one of the suited men stepped out. "Everyone to the dining room, please," he said. "Mr. Cole is ready." The name meant nothing to Claire at first. Then the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just all at once. Chairs straightened. Voices died. Mitch pulled at his tie. And when the man they had all been waiting for stepped into the diner floor in a charcoal suit cut, so clean it looked like it belonged in another world entirely, Claire felt the air leave her lungs, because beneath the polished shoes, the crisp white shirt, and the quiet authority that made everyone stand still, she recognized the same steady eyes from the storm. Claire did not realize she had taken a step back until Tina's hand brushed her elbow. The man from the storm, the man she had fed with her own meal ticket less than 12 hours earlier, crossed the diner floor with the calm assurance of someone who had never once needed permission to enter a room. His suit was dark charcoal. His watch caught the morning light with one quiet flash, and every person from corporate seemed to arrange themselves around him without being told. But it was his face that made Claire's pulse stumble, because stripped of the rain, the wet jacket, and the exhaustion he had worn like a disguise, he looked even more composed than she remembered. Not softer, not warmer, just unmistakably in control. Mitch moved first, almost tripping over his own polished shoes as he hurried forward with a smile, so strained it looked painful. "Mr. Cole, welcome to Rosie's," he said, reaching out both hands like enthusiasm could erase memory. The man ignored the gesture. He stopped near the center booth and let his gaze travel once around the diner, over the coffee station, the pie case, the scuffed tile, the employees lined up in their aprons and name tags, until at last his eyes settled on Claire. "Good morning," he said, and the room seemed to still around the sound of his voice. One of the suited women beside him opened a leather folder. "For those of you who have not been introduced, this is Ethan Cole, founder and chief executive officer of Cole Hospitality Group." The words landed in Claire's chest one after another, too heavy to absorb all at once. Founder, chief executive officer, Cole. The name from 100 menu flyers, franchise stickers, and training posters she had never bothered to really see because rich men with company names on buildings did not belong to the same universe as waitresses who counted quarters before laundry day. Mitch let out a nervous laugh that died almost instantly. "Sir, if I had known you were coming in last night, I would have personally made sure you had the best seat in the house." Ethan turned toward him then, not angry, not theatrical, just cool in a way that made Claire think of steel under winter water. "That," he said, "is exactly the problem." No one moved. Claire could hear the ice machine cycle in the back and the faint rattle of a truck passing on the highway beyond the parking lot. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a small rectangle of paper, softened from rain and handling. Claire recognized it instantly. Her employee meal ticket. He held it between two fingers as if it were more valuable than the gold watch at his wrist. "Last night," he said, his eyes still on Mitch, "one person in this building saw a hungry stranger and treated him like a human being." Then his gaze returned to Claire, steady and impossible to hide from. "And what she did shocked me, because kindness without an audience is the rarest thing I have found in any business I own." Claire felt heat rush to her face, so fast it almost hurt. Every person in the diner seemed to turn toward her at once, and for one impossible second, she wished the old tile floor would open up and swallow her whole. She had spent her life trying not to be noticed by powerful people, because being noticed usually meant being judged, corrected, or dismissed. But Ethan Cole was looking at her as if she were the only honest thing in the room, and that was somehow harder to bear than the stares. Mitch found his voice first. "Sir, with respect, she violated policy," he said, too quickly, too eagerly, like a man trying to build a bridge out of paper before the flood reached him. "We cannot simply hand out free meals. There are procedures, inventory controls, employee conduct standards." Ethan did not look away from Claire right away. When he finally turned toward Mitch, his expression did not change, but the room seemed to cool by 10 degrees anyway. "Interesting," he said. "Then perhaps you can explain why your conduct report says employee meals are manager approved at end of shift, and why security footage from last night shows that the kitchen was still open when you told a paying customer to leave." Mitch blinked. The suited woman beside Ethan flipped to another page in her folder with calm efficiency. Claire stared at her. Security footage. Paying customer. The phrase snagged in her mind. Ethan let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to feel it. "I came here last night without announcement because anonymous complaints have been coming in for months," he said, addressing the whole staff now. "Complaints about food waste, mistreatment of employees, and selective service based on appearance." A murmur moved through the room. Tina lowered her eyes. One of the line cooks shifted his weight and looked suddenly fascinated by the floor. Claire could feel the truth of Ethan's words land on everyone because everyone had seen pieces of it, even if nobody had believed anything would ever change. Mitch forced a laugh that sounded dry and brittle. "Sir, these locations are under tremendous pressure. Sometimes staff misunderstand expectations." Ethan's gaze sharpened. Did Claire Bennett misunderstand expectations when she was suspended for giving away an approved employee meal? No one answered. Claire barely heard her own name through the pounding in her ears. Ethan took one measured step forward. Or did she understand something the rest of this operation forgot? He held up the rain-softened meal ticket again. A business can recover from one plate of food. It does not recover so easily when it teaches people that compassion is a liability. Claire swallowed hard. No one had ever defended her like that. Not in public, not with facts, not with dignity. It left her almost unsteady. Then Ethan looked at the corporate team and said, "Bring up the full incident report." The suited woman turned her tablet so the screen faced the room, and Claire saw her own name at the top, Mitch's signature beneath it, and a line of accusations that made her stomach drop, because this was no suspension form. Mitch had tried to fire her. For a moment Claire forgot how to breathe. The words on the tablet blurred, then sharpened again with cruel precision. Unauthorized distribution of food, insubordination, disruption of service, inappropriate conduct with a guest. Inappropriate conduct. Her stomach turned so suddenly she had to lock her knees to stay steady. She had expected unfair. She had not expected that. Around her, the room went quiet in the way people do when shame is not theirs, but they can still feel the heat of it. Mitch lifted both hands at once, already speaking before anyone asked him to. "That language is standard," he said, forcing out a smile that looked thinner every second. "We document every possibility to protect the business. It is procedural." Claire stared at him. Last night he had watched her give away one approved meal and turned it into something ugly on paper by morning. It made her feel small and furious at the same time. Ethan, however, did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had seen enough to stop hoping for better excuses. "Procedural," he repeated, his voice calm enough to make the words sound worse. He nodded once to the woman with the tablet. "Play the footage." The screen changed. There was Rosie's diner from the ceiling angle above the register, grainy but clear enough to show the storm on the windows, the late customers, the stranger in the wet jacket entering, Claire stepping forward, Mitch cutting him off. Nobody in the room moved. On the recording, Claire watched herself offer a menu, pour fresh coffee, carry the last hot plate to the booth. Then came the part she had not seen from the outside. Mitch standing by the counter, looking around first, checking who was watching, then making a note before she was even called into the office. The next clip showed the office itself with no sound, only image. Mitch sliding the form toward her. Claire signing. Mitch taking it back and adding more lines after she left. A soft gasp escaped from somewhere near the kitchen doors. Tina put a hand over her mouth. One of the line cooks muttered, "Wow," under his breath. Mitch straightened too fast. "That does not prove intent," he said. "We all edit reports after conversations." Ethan turned to the human resources director standing beside him. "Do we add false allegations about employee conduct after conversations?" The woman answered without hesitation. "No, we do not." Mitch's face lost what little color it had left. Claire could feel something shifting in the room now, not just fear, but relief. It was the relief that comes when a truth everybody felt, but nobody could prove finally steps into the light. Ethan looked at Claire again, and this time his expression held something gentler beneath the authority. "You were not being disciplined for breaking policy," he said, and every word landed clean. "You were being punished for reminding this place what decency looks like." Then he faced the entire staff and said, "As of this moment, Mitchell Harper is terminated for falsifying reports, retaliatory conduct, and failure to uphold company standards." No one cheered. No one needed to. Justice, Claire realized, did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it simply stood up straight and called a lie by its name. The silence that followed felt almost sacred, as if the whole diner had been holding its breath for months and had only just now remembered how to let it go. Mitch stood frozen for one stunned second, then handed over his store keys with a hand that shook before one of the corporate staff escorted him quietly toward the back. No shouting, no scene, just the clean, unmistakable end of borrowed authority. Claire watched him disappear and felt something loosen inside her, not triumph exactly, but the deep relief of seeing fear lose its uniform. Ethan waited until the door shut behind him before speaking again. "Everyone else," he said, his voice steady, "take 15 minutes. Then we are going to talk honestly about what needs to change here." The employees scattered in a low murmur, some stunned, some smiling in disbelief, some simply looking lighter. Claire stayed where she was, as if moving too quickly might break the moment and throw her back into the old version of her life. Ethan turned to her then, no longer addressing a staff, no longer standing as the chief executive officer speaking to a room, but as the man from the storm speaking to the woman who had fed him. "Claire," he said gently, "would you walk with me?" She followed him toward the windows, past the booth where he had sat the night before. In daylight the diner looked less dramatic and more worn, the cracked vinyl seats and faded menu boards impossible to ignore, but somehow the room felt more honest now too. Ethan rested one hand lightly on the back of the empty booth and looked at her with that same unnerving steadiness. "I did not come here looking for perfection," he said. "I came looking for proof that kindness still exists when there is nothing to gain from it." Claire lowered her eyes, suddenly embarrassed by the attention. "I just gave someone dinner." "No," Ethan said softly. "You risked your job for a stranger everyone else had already decided did not matter. That is not small." She swallowed and looked out the window at the parking lot, at the sunlight drying last night's rain from the asphalt. "It still cost me my shift. Then let me give something back that is worthy of what it cost you." When she turned to him again, Ethan was holding a slim folder, cream-colored, her name printed neatly across the front. "This is an offer," he said. "Paid training, full benefits, and a position on a new culture and community initiative I am building across all regional locations. I want people in leadership who understand service as dignity, not performance." "I think you do." Claire blinked at the folder without taking it. The words sounded too large, too polished, too expensive for someone who had spent the morning wondering whether to save 2 eggs for dinner. "I am a waitress," she said, almost apologetically. Ethan's expression changed then, just slightly, with something that looked like conviction sharpened by admiration. "You are a woman who saw a human being before you saw a transaction," he said. "Titles can be taught. Character cannot." Claire let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Her fingers closed around the folder at last. It felt real, solid, heavy with possibility. And when she looked up, Ethan was not smiling broadly or trying to impress her. He was simply watching her, as if her answer mattered to him more than he was used to admitting. "You do not have to decide this second," he said. "But I hope you say yes, Claire, because I have built a lot of successful places, and last night reminded me how rare it is to find the right person to help build something good." Claire did not answer him that morning, not because she wanted to say no, But because some offers are so life-changing they require a person to step outside of fear before she can even hear her own voice. 3 weeks later, she was standing in the lobby of Cole Hospitality's regional headquarters wearing a navy blazer that still felt too expensive for her shoulders, a company badge clipped neatly at her waist, and a notebook filled with ideas she had once been too practical to believe anyone would listen to. Ethan had been true to every word. The training was real. The salary was real. The benefits were real. But what surprised Claire most was that her opinion was real too. In meeting after meeting, when executives talked about efficiency and branding and market position, Ethan would glance toward her and ask, "What does that look like to the people on the floor?" And somehow the whole room would wait for her answer. She helped design late-night meal vouchers that managers could approve without fear, employee protection policies that could not be rewritten in some back office, and a new hospitality standard built around one simple idea. No person should ever be measured first by what they could pay. The initiative launched in 42 locations across 3 states, and on the morning of the official rollout, Claire found herself back where it had all begun, standing inside a transformed Rosie's Diner beneath clean lights and freshly painted walls as cameras from the local news shifted into position near the counter. A banner hung over the pie case with the words "No one leaves hungry," and every employee in the room had been given a raise, new training, and a direct human resources hotline printed on the back of their badges. Tina was crying already. Claire laughed when she saw it, then nearly started crying herself when Ethan stepped onto the small platform by the front windows. He was in another dark suit, composed as ever, but when his eyes found hers across the room, the formality in his face softened into something that belonged only to them. "This program," he said, addressing the gathered staff and reporters, "did not begin in a boardroom. It began here, on a stormy night, when one waitress chose dignity over convenience." He reached into his inside pocket and drew out a small frame. Inside it, carefully preserved behind glass, was the paper employee meal ticket, rain creases and all. A murmur moved through the room. Claire pressed her fingers to her lips. Ethan held up the frame for everyone to see. "Most people keep reminders of success," he said. "I keep reminders of truth. This is the night I was reminded that kindness is not weakness, and that the right person can change an entire company simply by refusing to let someone go hungry." Then he turned fully toward Claire and extended his hand. Her heartbeat was so loud she was sure the microphones would catch it as she walked to him. When she reached the platform, Ethan did not rush the moment. He looked at her the same way he had in the diner booth, as if she were something rare enough to deserve his full attention. "Claire Bennett," he said, his voice gentler now, "meant more for her than the crowd. You helped build this. You made it better. You made me better too." The room seemed to fade at the edges. Claire could feel every mile she had walked in wet shoes, every bill she had counted, every time life had tried to convince her she was small, all gathering behind her like a road she no longer had to live on. Ethan reached for her hand, warm and steady. "And if you will let me," he said, with the faintest smile, "I would like to take you to dinner tonight, somewhere neither of us has to pretend to be anyone else." Claire laughed through the tears in her eyes, the kind of laugh that comes when relief and joy finally decide to arrive together. "Yes," she said, and this time the answer came easily. The applause around them rose warm and bright, but Claire only heard the quiet truth underneath it all. On the worst night of his disguise, she had given a stranger her last meal, and in return life had given her back more than a job, more than justice, more even than a second chance. It had given her a future and a love honest. Enough to begin with one small act no one was ever supposed to notice.